Commerce and Economic Development. It is Tuesday, April 30th, 2024 at 9:03 in the morning. So we're going to use this time just to learn a little bit more about the Everyone Eats restaurant meals program. So Teddy, would you like to join us? Thank you for coming in this morning. We appreciate your time. And
of course, thank you for fitting me in this morning. I'll pass some of these around. These are copies of the food security roadmap. There's one for each member of the committee, so you could just leave them at the empty chairs, please. Pull up. So good morning, everyone. For the record, I am Teddy Wozniak, and I am the Legislative Policy Lead with Hunger Free Vermont. And I want to thank you for the time this morning to talk with you some more about the Restaurant Meals Program. The Restaurant Meals Program is available to Vermont through the federal SNAP program. And we're excited to talk to you about the opportunity for both everyday meal needs as well as emergency response in regards to food security in Vermont. So first, I'd like to put this into a bigger context, even more exciting than the Restaurant Meals Program already is. Hunger Free Vermont is a member of the team that created the Vermont Food Security Roadmap to 2035, which is the document you have in front of you. And we have the additional perspective as members of the Mass Feeding Work Group, which is now known as the Food Access Information Network. This group is comprised of staff from multiple state agencies and statewide nonprofits, and was convened in 2020 under the auspices of the SEOC when it became clear that the pandemic was also a hunger crisis. Our experiences working within this group to address the lack of food security emergency response planning led to the inclusion of a set of strategies within the food security roadmap focused on creating a food security emergency response system in Vermont. We are excited for this opportunity to bring some recommendations to you that will advance the critical Vermont food security roadmap goal and come from Hunger Free Vermont's direct experiences working to strengthen food security for everyone in Vermont over the past 4 years. Over 600 Vermonters provided their experiences, opinions, feedbacks, and hopes as the basis for this roadmap. And these Vermonters are our neighbors, our family, our constituents, and we believe that together we can work to ensure that hidden hunger does not exist in Vermont. In the past, your committee has championed Vermont Everyone Eats, and like Everyone Eats and also Vermont Emergency Eats, the roadmap recognizes that economic development, local agriculture, and Vermonters' physical access to food can and should be intertwined. The roadmap calls for us to strengthen and expand the state's prepared meal infrastructure, utilizing existing meal programs such as Meals on Wheels when feasible. Both the House and the Senate version of the FY25 budget include a mechanism to draw down federal match money to strengthen the senior nutrition programs. And we support that provision and thank the legislature for its creative thinking, as we are big fans at Hunger Free Vermont of maximizing federal dollars. The strategy in the roadmap also includes increasing the capacities of schools, restaurants, grocery stores, and farms to provide prepared meals, and expanding infrastructure and systems for delivery and access of those meals. Adding this capacity and strength will help in the everyday and when we have a statewide emergency. Specifically on page 25 of the roadmap, strategy 5.4 references the SNAP restaurant meals program and recommends that Vermont opt into the federal provision, to provide it to qualifying residents. Small business owners are eager to accept SNAP and have an additional way to support their community members who need prepared meals. As you heard last week, this program will be a dignified, consistent resource for Vermonters who are unable to prepare their own foods. It will provide income for small businesses, and it will bring federal funds into the state economy. During both the COVID pandemic and the floods, Hunger Free Vermont was shocked to discover that understanding who needs food and who is in charge of collecting and sharing the information is not in any town emergency plan, and it is not in the state emergency planning template, and it is not identified as the role of any state office in particular. We've provided testimony about this in your Government Operations Committee, and they have added food access to the language in S310 for emergency response planning, which we greatly appreciate and applaud. During the recent flooding events, when it became apparent that there was no system in place to accurately track where prepared meals were needed, and throughout the many regions affected by the flooding, so that the Red Cross, Salvation Army, World Central Kitchen could effectively plan and distribute them, Hunger Free Vermont was asked by the SEOC to figure out a way to get this data to the national emergency response organizations. And we did our best. We mobilized our network of hunger councils. We pieced together what was relayed to us and working with partners like Feeding Chittenden and small businesses to send food trucks with prepared meals to isolated and hard-hit towns like Marshfield and Hardwick. With the added language in S310, we hope that we can plan ahead for situations like this. During the initial 3-week period of the floods, when all of the churches in Montpelier sustained so much damage that they had to abruptly end their food shelf and free congregant meal operations, the Skinny Pancake in town began serving free meals to all who needed them, but let Hunger Free Vermont know that without a source of funding, they would not be able to keep going. We scrambled together to secure private funds to cover some of their costs so that they could keep providing this critical food lifetime for our state's capital city. Many restaurants and food trucks all over Vermont jumped in to provide free meals in the first weeks immediately following the July floods. And yet there was no provision in place at any state level to fund these efforts. It was left to SEVCA, Hunger Free Vermont, and private philanthropy to cobble together stipends to keep these valuable small businesses open and help some of them cover their losses. While I'm very proud of our state's efforts, our staff and state's efforts, Hunger Free Vermont is not an emergency response organization. We were not equipped to suddenly create a system for accurately mapping and responding to where food and meals were needed. Food security during the next disaster just cannot be left to community and nonprofit organizations alone to address. This planning needs to happen at the highest level of government, just like all of our other disaster management planning, and to be on the top of minds well before the next disaster occurs. Again, we believe that the language that has been added to S310 addresses this need. Now, related to the planning is the suggestion you heard last week from the Everyone Eats folks for the state of Vermont to participate in the SNAP Restaurant Meals Program. The state's participation in this program can help address both the everyday needs that exist year-round, and also, as mentioned last week, it can help to build a system that is ready to respond during an emergency and utilize already available federal funds to make that happen immediately. We want to build on the success of Vermont Everyone Eats and Vermont Emergency Eats in a way that maximizes federal funding and provides benefits to Vermonters every day and also in the emergency situations. So the Restaurant Meals Program is run through the USDA Food and Nutrition Services, and it allows certain SNAP recipients to use their benefits at approved restaurants. Those SNAP recipients, in order to use their benefits at these restaurants, must be elderly, as defined as 60 years of age or older, disabled, meaning they receive disability or blindness payments or receive disability retirement benefits from a governmental agency because of a disability, homeless, or to be the spouse of a SNAP recipient who fits one of those three criteria. And those are all definitions that are set by USDA and FNS. For restaurants to qualify, they must get approval from the state of Vermont as well as USDA's Food and Nutrition Services. Importantly, each state can set their own rules for how many and which restaurants participate. So this is one of the rare federal programs where the state actually has a lot of flexibility and ability to impact how it's implemented. A position is needed to ensure that restaurants have the support they need to apply to participate, and the agency has the capacity to implement the program. I will send you the original bill language, which is H703 and S215. And in the original bill language, the sponsors place the position in the Agency of Human Services. However, we believe it might be better placed in the Agency of Commerce and Community Development because the main job of this person would be to recruit restaurants and food trucks to participate in the food program, to navigate the federal application process, and to acquire the needed point of sale equipment and coding that's necessary to accept Three Squares Vermont SNAP benefits at their restaurants. The language, as I mentioned, comes from H703 and S215. S215 was passed out of the Senate Health and Welfare Committee. Further action on the bill was deferred in Senate appropriations. While we understand completely that an appropriation for the Restaurant Meals Program Navigator position is not likely to happen this session, we do emphasize that based on informational interviews with other states that have implemented the Restaurant Meals Program, that a position is absolutely essential to the program's effectiveness. However, based on the testimony you heard last week, we are inquiring whether the beginning of this work could be absorbed by the staffing already existing within the agency. We have a meeting scheduled with Secretary Curley later this morning to discuss the possibility of the restaurant meals program being added as an amendment to S 310. And if we are able to find a path forward, we hope that the committee would support that amendment. Establishing the SNAP restaurant meals program in Vermont would support the ability to quickly make and distribute prepared meals at the local level during disasters by establishing a network of restaurants, food trucks, deli counters, etc., already working with AHS and ACCD, which could be quickly mobilized to also use federal and state disaster fund to set up a prepared meal distribution program. This program flexibility is critical in terms of a disaster, because as we saw during both the COVID-19 pandemic and the floods of July 2023, prepared meals are a critical resource for feeding people. And our local restaurants are often one of the businesses most impacted by changes in economic conditions brought about by disasters. So by establishing the SNAP Restaurant Meals Program in Vermont now, we will ensure that our restaurants are ready and able to accept SNAP during future disruptions and provide much needed prepared meals to households that qualify and need them, using a stable source of federal funding to do so. The SNAP Restaurant Meals Program supports critical future infrastructure. For example, in Barrie, my other hat is I'm a Barrie City Councilor, and in Barrie during the 2023 floods, businesses were not as strongly impacted, but many low-income city residents overnight became homeless. Had the restaurant meals program been available, federal SNAP benefits could have been used more flexibly to allow people over the age of 60, people with disability, and people who were now homeless because they were impacted by the flood to access prepared food that did not require home kitchen facilities. Participating local restaurants would have been able to receive the federal funds that would pay for these meals through the SNAP program immediately at the point of sale. So as I said, we're meeting later this morning with Secretary Curley to determine whether that this is some work that the agency could take on now to get the ball rolling. And if we can find a path forward with the agency, we'd be looking to have an amendment added to S 310, which we would ask the committee to support. And I will follow up with more of this in writing. I just wanted to wait until our meeting with Secretary Curley before I submitted anything to you all in writing. And I'd be happy to answer any questions because I know I talk very fast.
So, thank you. I appreciate that. And you may have covered it, but I'm not sure I don't recall the detail. SNAP is fully federal. The SNAP Restaurant Meals Program is a federal program. There's no state match for that.
Correct. The program allows recipients to use their SNAP dollars at participating restaurants, and all those SNAP dollars come from federal funding. The only state funding that would theoretically be required is an additional position to support it or anything like that. But we're hopeful to avoid that by talking to the secretary and hopefully getting the agency to absorb some of that work in the staff that they already have.
And have you done any research or have you any information quest with other states that have that program? Are they able to bring in more federal funds because they have this program? Is that something that you've looked into at all?
I don't know whether they would necessarily draw down more federal funds because of the program. It allows recipients to use the federal dollars that they are already getting in another way. And to directly answer your question, there are 9 other states that have the restaurant meals program, and we met with 7 or 8 of them and have communicated with all of them. And one thing that they all reinforced to us was how critical it is to have somebody within state government who can help the restaurants navigate the various bureaucratic processes that are required to.
One more. Okay, so we're looking at the same federal dollars going to the same people being used in a different way.
Yeah.
So what concerns do you have on impacting the nonprofits that are currently providing food that aren't restaurants for those folks?
We don't see a big impact there. As I said, it's just another option. So if folks want to continue to go to their local food bank, they can continue to go do that. Programs like Meals on Wheels will continue to function as they have been functioning. This just gives SNAP recipients one more option on how to use their SNAP dollars.
So you haven't looked at that as, in the states that have expanded restaurant meal programs. You haven't looked at what happens to the other food providers and if they need more state funding or if they have to do other additional fundraising in order to stay effective in their communities.
That's not a question that we directly asked, but I would also just add that that wasn't a concern that came up in any of the states either. We were very like, tell us what challenges, what, what was hard about setting up this program? What were the unintended consequences? And that is not something that we heard from states.
Great, thanks. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Teddy. So during COVID, I started a mutual aid group that eventually turned into a resilience commission in town. And like one of the biggest things and horrifying things was like, we didn't have any plans in place when it came to food and outreach and things like that. That's why we did it. And then helping to organize like the states and even like Vermont setting an example nationally as far as like mutual aid coordination. Like, I just thank you for thinking about how to have a plan in place before we actually need it. And so, yeah, I'm really excited about this. So thanks for your work.
Thank you, Mike. I would echo Representative Priestley's excitement. I know during the flooding in Barry over the summer, the morning after the flood, I went to the Aud where the cots were being set up for sheltering. At that touch point, it's hundreds of people. And there was no food available and very little bottled water. And thankfully, I was able to call in a few favors, but there was nothing there. And the state didn't have an immediate response. Eventually, Red Cross was able to, and FEMA were able to get there. And there were stacks and pallets of water. But in the immediate evacuation of the shelters on the Barry Montpelier Road, those folks had nothing, and that was very concerning. There were children in that facility. And so I'm very supportive of this effort, and I see it as another way to tap into federal monies for Vermont. It's good for our economy. It's good for our restaurants. Yeah, and to Representative Granning's point, I think it's worth saying that a lot of these food security groups in Vermont do provide assistance to individuals and families who want to sign up for SNAP. The food bank I know has a SNAP enrollment assistance group center that helps people navigate that process. So I do see it as a network of supportive efforts.
Yeah. And if I could just respond to that as well, obviously you and I know Barry very well, but it's such a good example because you have a lot of low income folks who are using Three Squares Vermont benefits, but are not disabled, are not homeless, or are not elderly. And when you have a disaster like the floods, where that group of people all of a sudden overnight now becomes homeless, they all now, because of the disaster, qualify for the restaurant meals program. And if we have that existing infrastructure of restaurants signed up for the restaurant meals program, if they have a food truck, we can send that food truck to Barry and those families can get access to prepared meals literally overnight. Whereas just to Representative Williams' point, that's just not an infrastructure that currently exists.
So, with this program, through SNAP, is that trying to understand how it works? Are we talking about, so during disasters, this would come into focus, or this would be ongoing?
This would be ongoing. I think it's just especially applicable in a post-disaster environment, but it's once a restaurant is approved as a restaurant meals program restaurant, as long as that restaurant's open, they are an RMP qualified restaurant.
And what other meals that are available to people? Are they anything that's on a menu, or is it kind of like the Everyone Eats program where they were they were producing meals that were, lower cost?
So as part of the process to become an approved restaurant, the meal has to put together an at-cost meal and have that be an offering. But the SNAP recipient does, so the restaurant has to offer that, but the customer does not have to necessarily purchase that meal. It has to be available to them, but the customer could go in and purchase anything on the menu at the restaurant. But there has to be at least an option there for a very low cost.
Is there any worries that people could use up their SNAP benefits very quickly and then be, not have enough money food for the rest of the month?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's when it comes back to the choice and to the accessibility. For example, you have a lot of folks especially those elderly, disabled, and homeless that may not have a place to store food. So going to the grocery store and using their SNAP benefits on milk, bread, eggs, meats, that's not a good option for them because they have no way to cook it themselves. They have no way to store it and prepare it. The restaurant meals program just gives those folks another option for how to use their dollars. And it also, under your point, underscores the significance of that cheaper meal option that the restaurants are required to provide. So they have to provide a cheaper meal so that folks, have a cheaper option at the restaurant. But, it comes down to personal agency and choice about how folks want to use their allocated, SNAP's designed as a grocery supplement. So how folks, it's designed not to be someone's entire grocery budget, but to supplement a grocery budget. So if it's easier for folks, if it's more accessible for folks to use that supplement in a restaurant meal setting, great. But they'll still, have the other options of food banks and going to the grocery store. But for some folks, getting transportation to a grocery store, storing the food or preparing the food themselves is not a good option. And for those folks, the restaurant meals program could be very significant.
I just worry that someone in those scenarios could wind up using up all of their, and then what's the option after that when they've used up all of their benefits on SNAP in a short period of time? And, how are these people still being taken care of?
And I think for most people, SNAP is not their only resource for accessing different types of food. Especially with inflation and the rising cost of groceries, it's often just as expensive to go to the grocery store now as it is to get a more economic, cheaper meal at a restaurant. So the point is well taken, but I also think that it's important to remember that the restaurant meals program is targeted towards elderly, disabled, and homeless folks who are the folks that have the most trouble with transportation and the most trouble with storing and cooking food from a grocery store. So again, it just gives them another option.
I'm just wondering for those folks, how are they being fed now and taken care of with food insecurities? And then I just want to make sure that we're not providing something to someone that they can go in and, they take a $40 or $50 meal and they have that for a week, and then all of a sudden they get 3 weeks of no benefits at all. And so will there be some type of education to help people understand what's available to them, what the ramifications might be if they choose, the high-end meals opposed to the lower end meals?
Yeah, Hunger Free Vermont, as always, is poised and ready to do education we've already started doing education and outreach to restaurants, and we've already started doing education and outreach to Three Squares Vermont participants who would be affected by this. We had a great witness come in when the bill was heard in Senate Health and Welfare, who was talking about how he puts together the puzzle every month of he goes to the food banks and gets some things, he spends his SNAP money on some things, and then he pays for some things out of pocket. But he added that the piece that was missing is that he couldn't take his granddaughters out for a birthday dinner. And while that's not necessarily a food security issue, it's a human dignity thing where even folks who are on SNAP, I think, deserve to go out to a local restaurant and be a part of their community and support the local economy. So your point is absolutely well taken, and we are absolutely ready to do the education, the outreach, making sure folks understand that this is not that this is just an option available to them. But I would also posit that folks who are receiving SNAP benefits should be able to participate in their local economy and patronize their local restaurants, just like all of the other members of our community. Great, thank you. I will keep you all updated on our conversations with the secretary.
One more question.
Yes.
I know you're asking ACCD, but do we have emergency management wrapped in this as well?
Yeah, we've been talking with the S310 with the emergency
Yeah.
management bill. So we've been talking with all of those folks. As well.
'Cause I think it would be good for emergency management once this gets set up, or maybe they consult with ACCD consults with them as well, so that they have the list of restaurants throughout the state that are participating. So when an emergency does hit an area, it's well known right away.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Just to have a little bit of language in there, making sure that they're connected.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, Amy Scholler for the record, representing number 3, the language that House Gov Ops added to S310 does direct at all levels, as Rep. Priestley was saying, for food access planning for emergency management. So I actually think that language would cover this. If this amendment went forward, that would be absorbed into that planning.
Okay, good. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
I think that's it for this morning. We're gonna try for 1 o'clock. I don't know how well that's gonna work. Not sure what the plan is this morning for the floor. I don't know if
We're gonna break before or the days that there.
So we probably won't start till 1 o'clock, so I don't know that we'll get feed in today or not, so. We'll play it by ear. Right. That's all we got. The rest of the week is TBD, except tomorrow morning at 10:30, we're bringing in Secretary Saunders to meet her and talk to her about CPD. Workforce development through the schools, so. I don't have anything else. Anybody have anything they wanna share or bring up? Okay, we can go off live, Andrew.